What if the wild called you, and you answered? Deep in the heart of an ancient forest where time stands still and shadows whisper old secrets, a transformation is unfolding. She came here to escape the noise of the world. But the forest had other plans. Beneath the pale glow of the moon, she was chosen. This is the tale of a woman reborn through fang and fury. A primal metamorphosis fueled by instinct, blood and magic older than memory. Tonight she hunts, and the forest will never forget. The forest didn't welcome visitors. It endured them long before man etched paths into its soil, before names were given to rivers and borders drawn around its trees. The woods breathed with an ancient rhythm, one untouched by civilization. It hummed with secrets older than language, and somewhere within those secrets waited, watching, listening. Tonight the air was thick with something unseen. Not quite wind, not quite storm, the kind of stillness that makes animals burrow and birds go silent. The moon had begun its rise, a silver eye prying open behind a veil of drifting clouds, bathing the forest in pale ghostly light. And there, beneath that watchful moon, she ran. Her name was Elara, though that name would soon lose meaning. She was 30, a botanist by profession, a wanderer by soul. This was her fourth solo trip into the Ashmere woods, part research, part ritual. She claimed it helped her connect to nature, an echo of her mother's teachings of earth magic whispered in childhood. But this trip, this was different. She'd felt it since dusk, a humming beneath her skin, a fever in her bones, something not quite right. The wind didn't blow. It pulled. Her boots crushed leaves that had lain undisturbed for decades. The trees seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, just slightly, as if making room for her passage. She stopped at a clearing, the same one she always returned to. The trees formed a perfect crescent, their trunks like sentinels. The earth here was soft, the air always warm, even in winter. But tonight, it was charged, as if lightning waited, just above the canopy, held back only by the will of the stars. She knelt by a stone, smooth, black, and ancient, not native to these parts. It had called to her on her first expedition years ago, buried just beneath the soil. Elara had unearthed it with reverent hands and found it pulsing with residual heat, as though the sun had only just left it. Since then, every trip back had been a pilgrimage. She pressed her palm against it now. It pulsed, a low vibration, like a purring animal or a distant growl. She blinked. Her heart skipped. Then pain, not sharp, not sudden, but deep, crawling. Her spine arched as warmth flooded her gut. Her vision blurred around the edges, colors brightening unnaturally. She stumbled back from the stone, clawing at her jacket, suddenly suffocating in her own skin. A scream built in her throat but never made it out. Instead, a gurgled, growling gasp. Elara fell to her knees, her fingers dug into the dirt, clawing, scrabbling as her bones snapped, not breaking, reshaping. She screamed again, but the sound was no longer human. Her spine rippled like a wave beneath her skin, vertebrae shifting, tailbone elongating. Her jaw cracked wide as canines forced their way past her teeth. Her skin rippled, blistered, and tore. Not with blood, but with fur. She was unraveling. But it wasn't chaos, it was a ritual. A transformation carved not into her body but into her lineage, passed through blood, through story, through ancient feral inheritance. The moon now hovered above the clearing, bathing Elara's writhing form in silver. Her eyes, wide with terror, turned glassy, then glowed with a golden light as pupils shrank to slits. Her thoughts began to shatter, one by one. Scientific terms, childhood memories, her name, each falling away like brittle leaves until only instinct remained. The final shift came suddenly, a violent snap of the spine, a full-bodied shudder, and then stillness. She stood on four limbs, taller than a wolf, more graceful than a bear. Her body was lean, powerful, muscle wrapped in dense silver-gray fur, ears high and twitching, nostrils flared, claws gleaming like obsidian in the moonlight, and her eyes burned with something both human and ancient, something wild. A knowing, a rage, a hunger. She sniffed the air. The forest responded, every tree, every root, every heartbeat. It was all suddenly visible, an intricate web of life humming in glorious clarity. She turned her head toward the east, toward movement. A deer, half a mile away. Its heartbeat sounded like thunder in her ears. Her mouth opened, saliva dripped. Her tongue lolled in anticipation. She moved, silent as mist, fast as shadow. She no longer thought in words. Thoughts had become flashes, smells, movement, heat signatures. Hunger was not a feeling but a drumbeat in her limbs. The deer's scent laced the wind like perfume, sweet and sharp with panic. It had sensed her. It didn't know what she was, only that she was wrong, the kind of wrong that nature had learned long ago to flee from. The deer darted through the underbrush. She followed, not crashing through branches or howling with glee. That would have been wasteful. No, she was a whisper, a ripple of fur and muscle. Her body twisted with an elegance that defied logic, her claws barely disturbing the forest floor. Time slowed, every stride stretched into eternity. She could feel the soil compress beneath her paws. She could smell every droplet of sweat on the deer's body. She was close enough now to hear its heart, a frantic galloping drum. And just as quickly as the chase began, it ended. A final burst of speed, a leap, a cry. Her claws sank deep into flesh and they tumbled. The forest floor erupted in a flurry of leaves and dirt. The deer kicked wildly, screaming in a pitch only animals know, its eyes wide and rolling, mouth frothing. She silenced it with her jaws, a crunch, a final twitch, and then quiet. She stood over the carcass, panting, not from exertion, but from exhilaration. Warm blood coated her snout. Steam rose in wisps from the open wound. The scent filled her lungs and ignited something deeper than hunger, something closer to joy. She tore into the meat with a ferocity only the wild could grant, but as she devoured her kill, something strange flickered inside her. A moment, a memory, surfaced like a bubble in still water. A hand holding a flower, a smile, a voice. Elara, always listen to the woods. They'll teach you what the world forgets. The memory vanished. She snarled, shaking her head violently. The human part of her was trying to resurface, trying to name what she had become. But names were meaningless now. She didn't need to understand the woods. She was part of them. The meal ended with bones cracked and marrow drained. She licked the blood from her fur, her tongue rasping over coarse hair. The moon had climbed higher, its light now casting sharp angles across the forest. She looked skyward, and for a moment she howled. It wasn't a lonely sound. It was triumph. Somewhere, far off, the forest answered, not with howls, but with movement. Things shifted. Birds took to the air. Trees creaked. The wind picked up. The magic that had awakened her hadn't faded. It was growing, reaching into the soil, into the air, into the marrow of the creatures who called this place home. She could feel it in her bones. This was not a one-time change. This was the beginning of something deeper. She leapt up onto a fallen log, muscles rippling beneath her fur. Her eyes scanned the darkness, not with fear, but with hunger. There were other things in the forest tonight. Things that watched from a distance. Small things, fragile things. She could smell rabbits, foxes, owls. But another scent caught her. Attention. Human, not the lingering traces she had passed earlier on trails and discarded trash. This was fresh, close. Her ears perked. The sound of a zipper, a metal flask. Footsteps, careless, unaware. She turned her snout to the wind. 3 of them, young, male. Their scent laced with beer and smoke. Probably campers from the northern edge, where the forest met the highway. She growled low, not from anger, but from instinct. They didn't belong here. Not tonight, not in her territory. She padded silently toward the scent. As she moved, her breath fogged in the chill. Her body adjusted effortlessly to the temperature. The cold didn't touch her anymore. Her heart beat steady, calm, but her muscles coiled like springs. Through the trees, she saw them. 2 sat near a fire, laughing. The third stood a few feet away, facing a tree, relieving himself. They wore headlamps, though the light did little more than create pools of false safety in the darkness. She circled. They didn't see her. Not yet. Her claws sank silently into the moss. Her breath slowed. She crouched low, but something stopped her. A flicker of that buried memory again. Her mother's voice, the warning, the reverence for life. The teachings that told her everything in the woods had purpose, that balance was sacred. The beast within snarled. The human part remembered compassion, mercy. But the moon demanded obedience. Her lips curled back, she stepped forward. A twig snapped. 3 heads turned. The sound of the twig was insignificant. To any other predator it wouldn't have mattered. But to the boys by the fire, tipsy, yes, but not deaf, it was thunder. A jarring reminder that they were not alone. They turned sharply, flashlights sweeping the trees. The boy furthest from the fire, tall, skinny, the one who had wandered to relieve himself, froze mid-motion, fumbling with his zipper as his eyes locked onto something in the dark. He didn't know what he was seeing, only that it had eyes, amber gold, gleaming like coals, high. Too high for a wolf, too quiet for a bear. The shape was wrong. Lithe, narrow-hipped, with a sloping back and an unsettling stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace but from control. "Guys," he whispered, barely breathing. "There's something out there." The others laughed, nervously. "Dude, it's a deer," one of them said, standing now with a beer bottle in hand. "Or a coyote. Relax." But then he saw the eyes, too. The laughter died. The silence that followed was colder than the air around them. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Her fur shimmered in the firelight, gray like storm clouds, tipped in black. Her snout glistened, with dried blood. Her shoulders rippled with each step. Not charging, not sneaking, just approaching as if daring them to move. One of the boys backed away, hand shaking as he dropped his bottle. It shattered. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and for a split second the human inside her twitched. "This isn't right," it whispered. "Leave them, go." But the she-wolf had tasted blood. She had claimed this land, and they were intruding. The tall boy stumbled over a log and fell backwards. His headlamp flew off and landed near her paws. The beam lit her face. That's when they saw the teeth, not the sharpness. Plenty of creatures had sharp teeth, but the smile behind them. As though she understood, as though she enjoyed their fear. She lunged, not at the tall boy, not yet, at the fire. A massive paw swept through the burning logs, scattering them. Sparks exploded into the air like dying stars. The campfire hissed and cracked, plunging the clearing into chaos. Smoke, heat, shouting. The boys screamed. One ran. Another fumbled for something in his bag. Maybe a knife, maybe a flashlight. She vanished into the dark, not gone, circling. Her body moved low and fast. The sound of her paws vanished beneath the chorus of snapping branches and panicked breath. She didn't attack yet. She wanted to feel them squirm. Her mind no longer held plans, only urges. The thrill of the chase surged hotter than any hunger. She wasn't a mindless beast. She was a predator with intent. And these boys were hers. The first to fall was the slowest, the one with the knife. He turned too late. His flashlight beam cut through empty woods just before her body slammed into his chest like a battering ram. They tumbled. His scream was high-pitched, desperate. She pinned him. Their eyes met. He tried to speak, to plead. She didn't care for words. Her teeth ended him in seconds. The other two had split, one toward the river, the other deeper into the trees. She turned toward the scent of running water. The riverbank was soft, muddy. Every footstep left a perfect trail. She followed effortlessly, her vision slicing through darkness like a blade. She found the tall boy first. He was halfway across the shallows, splashing, sobbing, clutching his arm where the branches had torn his jacket. He slipped on a rock and fell, submerging in the freezing water. He surfaced, gasping. That was when she pounced. A blur of muscle and claws. She crossed the water in 3 strides. Her jaws clamped down on his calf. He screamed, kicked wildly, but his blows were weak, panicked. She dragged him back to the shore, thrashing like a dog with a rag doll, and then she stopped, her paw on his chest. his face pale, soaked, twisted with terror. His eyes blue, young, too young. For the first time she hesitated. The forest stilled, her chest heaved. The scent of his blood curled into her lungs. It would be so easy, but something in her snapped, like a rope pulled too tight. She stepped back, snarled, and vanished into the trees. The boy didn't wait. He crawled, then ran, barefoot and broken, into the dark, not daring to look back. The she-wolf stood behind a thick elm, watching, not from guilt, not from mercy, but confusion. The hunger still pulsed inside her, but her limbs trembled. Her thoughts came faster now. Less instinct, more memory. Elara, the name returned like a whisper in a storm. She snarled, shaking it off, but it clung to her. Something was changing again. The full moon, still high above, began its slow descent. The forest had gone still, not just silent but reverent, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. She stood at the edge of a cliff, where the land dropped away into a vast valley, mist curling below like spilled milk. The wind licked through her fur, carrying the scents of blood, water, and fear. She closed her eyes, and for the first time that night she heard her own heartbeat. Thud, thud, not the frantic pounding of a hunt, but slow, rhythmic, human. A chill traced her spine, not from the cold, but from within. Something was peeling back. The beast trembled, her claws, once tools of death, dug into the earth. Her breath grew uneven, the moon, beginning its descent in the sky, dimmed slightly behind the trees. The magic that had flooded her veins was retreating, drawing inward like the tide, and with it, pain returned. Bones shifted, her legs buckled, as her joints reversed course, twisting back into angles meant for a bipedal creature. Muscles spasmed, her skull cracked and reshaped, the snout shortening, jaw popping. Her fur thinned in patches, vanishing beneath emerging skin slick with sweat. The transformation was not glorious. It was brutal, ugly. She screamed, not as a wolf, not as a human, something in between. When it ended, she was curled on her side, naked and trembling, her breath misting in short bursts. Her body was covered in bruises, dirt, and dried blood, some her own, most not. And she remembered her name was Elara. She had come to the woods alone, grieving a life that no longer felt like her own. A recent breakup, a lost job, the slow disintegration of who she thought she was. The forest had been a place of solace in her childhood. Now she thought it might heal her again. She had found the old stone circle days ago, hidden beneath roots and moss. She hadn't meant to call anything. She had just knelt inside it, hands on the earth, whispering for strength. She didn't know the land still listened. She didn't know something old had heard her plea. Now lying there, raw and reborn, she wept not from fear but from clarity. She had become something ancient, something the world had tried to forget. A she-wolf, a vessel for wild magic. She sat up slowly. Her limbs ached, but they moved with a strange grace. She was no longer quite human, not entirely. The beast was still there, sleeping perhaps, but not gone. She looked at her hands. They were hers again. But she remembered what they had done. A part of her recoiled. Another part whispered that it had been necessary. The world had forgotten fear, forgotten reverence, and she had become a reminder. Somewhere behind her, birds began to sing, timid and uncertain. Dawn was near. She rose to her feet and walked to the edge of the cliff again. Below, the forest spread like a living sea. She could feel it breathing. She knew now she would never leave it, not fully, not forever. The city, the cars, the endless noise, they were part of a different life. This place had chosen her, marked her. The transformation was not a curse, it was a calling, one she couldn't refuse. Elara turned away from the cliff and began walking, barefoot and bare-skinned, through the thinning mist. Her body hurt, her mind throbbed with memory. But her senses were still sharp. She could feel the heartbeat of the land around her, and she smiled, because she knew the next full moon would rise again, and she would answer it, not with fear, but with teeth. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling legends and terrifying tales, make sure to like this video. It really helps us out. You can also click on our Ultimate Werewolf playlist to watch more horror and cryptid stories. The link is in the description below. And if you love horror, folklore, and unexplained mysteries, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of fear seekers. But don't stop there. Turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Because in the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them. And trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.